It is such a pleasure to have episode 111 with my beautiful wife, Jennifer Dunning. And we're going to be talking about the art of compatibility in dating, in marriage. And I mean, you're so good at this. This is what you do. You're a therapist, but you really focus on relationship counseling. So I'm going to try and pull as much wisdom as I can out of you for the next hour.
Hello from the other side of our house. I am so glad to finally be on your podcast. I was resistance on my end a bit, but I just felt a bit of pressure in making sure I added value to your show. And that's quite an introduction. So thank you. I'll try to give value. We do talk about this very late at night about love and compatibility. And again, it's your 111th episode. So what better way to celebrate that than to talk about this topic today? And it's a sentimental number actually for us. So hopefully we can touch base on why that is. But
let's start with this, Jen. Let's start with the fact that you changed careers much like I did in your mid to late 30s. And you're so much happier today than you were before. And I think it's just such a good lesson. So I'd love to start a little bit about how you ended up changing careers, because so many people feel like they've invested a lot in their current position and they're scared to start again. And I think you, and to a lesser extent me, were examples of the fact that you can reinvent yourself and you can be a lot happier. So I love your story of reinvention, how you became a therapist.
Absolutely. But before I forget, I wanted to do a quick shout out to my lionesses, my best girlfriends who have really encouraged me to be on this show. And have said, of course, we want to hear what you and Lawrence have to talk about. They make me blush all the time and always say that our relationship is such a good model for them. And the segue, I guess, to introduce the topic of compatibility. That's a topic I think that is so fitting for today's episode. Always my answer to them is Lawrence and I are just very compatible. And they'll ask, how do we meet someone that's compatible to us? So it's dedicated to my lionesses and a bunch of our friends actually who are very curious about what makes a good relationship and how can we find a relationship. And of course, our friend Ron, who has been cyberbullying me a bit getting into your show. I joke, but I hope you enjoy this episode, Ron, because you have been tagging me quite a lot about being on the show, and here I am. But yes, but back to kind of my journey. It is a long story. This is probably the most I'll be talking for a long segment, but it is a very important part of my life. The reinvention part of it, and coming to the conclusion of you do have to go through a lot of shit to get to where you need to be. So I've dabbled in a few things. I realized that academic endeavors became challenges that I not only enjoyed, but it turned into kind of my personal conquest. And they have tied into my sense of meaning more or less. So I ended up dropping out of high school in my senior year. And at that time, I really felt really lost and defeated. I just was going through quite a lot. But I always dreamed of helping other people and turning that into a career. But I knew I had to get an education, but again, I was just really stumped. So after I got through all those mental battles, I decided, it's time. So I applied to a community college, and I still remember that period of my life. I was at a family party. I think I was showing off my acceptance letter, and it's kind of funny now because everyone gets into community college, right? But I was really excited because I knew this was the start of my quest for self-discovery and really challenging part of my old self. So again, wanted to be a helper. I loved kids, started in early childhood education, started working with preschool kids. And I really kind of wanted to elevate my specialties from there as I gained experience. And I was pleasantly surprised that I really liked school. I started getting 4.0s. I was getting full ride scholarships to schools, different universities. And really, I learned that I really liked school and learning. So I took advantage of that. I realized I wanted to be a speech language pathologist. I thought at that point that was like the aha moment for me. Like, this is what I'm going to be. So many of my family members not to stereotype, but I'm Filipino or in medicine, mostly nurses. So I got that pressure of, well, you're going to be a nurse, right? You're going to be a nurse, right? And I thought, well, I can do education and still be in the medical field. So speech language pathology did. So I ended up, I worked really hard. I got into a few competitive graduate programs. I ended up moving to a different state. And yeah, I thought I was on the right path. This was it. This was it. And then life throws curveballs at you, as you know. And halfway in my graduate program, I had a run in with an awful, awful, awful person. She was the tenured program director who, with being my field, I can now diagnose as a true sociopath. And I was just bullied quite a bit to the point where I had a civil rights attorney from the university get involved and they wanted to represent me. And at the end of the day, I chose peace. I just felt like I just had to leave because my life was a living hell. So I took my tuition money. I moved back home and dropped the lawsuit. And I said, what do I do now? Everything I worked hard for, I just felt like the 17-year-old girl that didn't know what she was doing again. So to recalibrate myself, and I had to really talk to myself about whether I wanted to sulk or if I wanted to fly. So I did end up applying to another speech and language pathology program. I got in, but they said that it would take about 2 years for me to get in because it was really competitive. So meanwhile, kind of trying to compensate, I think, and to still create that momentum, I got a master's in early childhood special education and then got a job as a social worker. And I ended up going to school for speech language pathology. And I was actually doing both the degrees at that time. And it just didn't feel the same. I felt really burnt out. I felt like, what's the point? I mean, why do I even want to be a therapist? So then I took a curve and got a master's in healthcare administration and another master's in business organizational leadership. And I still felt kind of crappy. I still felt like, I don't think I'm supposed to be here. I should be proud of all my accomplishments, but I wasn't really fulfilled. And then my mom died in 2016, and that just kind of buried me to the ground even deeper. And I felt really, really lost. And again, I felt like that kid, that lost kid, I had all these accomplishments, but I still felt like I was in the right place and I didn't have any motivation. And I probably hid that from you for a while because even though we met, I was really smiling. I was so happy that I met you, but I was going through that phase where, what do I do? But fast forward with some reflection, I realized, man, I really miss being a therapist. I miss that human connection with clients, but wanted to do it in a different capacity. At that point, speech language pathology to me was like, oh, it's just a major trigger. And I really thought, how can I ever go back to school again? If I wasn't satisfied with all those careers, what makes this different? But really, Lawrence, with your encouragement, it was hard too because it was in the middle of COVID, and you really encouraged me. I applied to Northwestern psychology program, and Northwestern to me when I was in college was like, oh my goodness, like can you even get into Northwestern? So I was really happy that I got admitted. But I was challenged a bit because I learned we were pregnant at the same month. And that's when it became really challenging to go through that tough program and be pregnant. And there were a lot of thoughts in my mind of, am I supposed to be doing this? Like, this is hard. I don't know if I'm ready to take this risk. But fast forward, told you it was a long story. Here I am. And I absolutely love what I do. Absolutely love it. I've never actually felt this kind of fulfillment. And I'm really happy that I'm here. And now I am working at a private practice as a psychotherapist, specializing in couples. And I have a life coaching business. And it just feels very great to be here. And as I tell my story now, I'm thinking, holy crap, that was a lot of hurdles. But I guess that's what it takes, right? Like you said, reinvent yourself and to go through all that to feel like, yeah, this is where you should be.
Well, I remember us having that conversation and it was so easy for me. You were so reticent because you were talking about, oh, I have all these school debts already. I'm already in my mid-30s. And for me, it was so easy to say, just go for it because I changed my careers into real estate in my mid-30s. And number one, I think it's good to reinvent yourself. So I think the humbling and the self-growth, it makes you a much better person. At the time, it does suck, no question. But looking back, it's always a good thing. And also, it's easy in your mid-30s to be like, oh, another 2 or 3 years. But as they say, the days are long, the years are short. Those years go by quickly. Before you knew it, you were graduated and now you're working, and just seeing you so much happier. I mean, obviously you made the right decision. And it's just anyone listening to this, that idea of the sunk cost fallacy. I remember when I first heard that I think it was my mid-20s, and it was shout out to my buddy, Brad Anastasia. He mentioned it. He kept saying, Lawrence, like, that's a sunk cost. Like, stop thinking about it like that. I can't remember what we were talking about. But it's such a good frame of reference, that sunk cost, because whether it's money or the time invested, once it's gone, it's gone. There's no point in harboring about the past, because the past is gone. All we have is this present moment, and then the future we're trying to design to have as many great moments in the present, in our present future. So I just think it's such a good thing to remember. And then just talking about you being a better therapist, there's no question in my mind that not you being clueless at 22, but anyone graduating in their early 20s, you're clueless. You haven't lived life yet. You don't have any life experiences. Myself, I was clueless too. We're all clueless. And you just you won't have the same rapport and connection and experience and stories to share with your clients. So it just makes you so much of a better therapist. Just like my background in finance makes me so much better when I'm talking to investors and analyzing financial analysis of properties. If I just came out of school and I didn't own any property and I hadn't had the ups and downs, how would I help them? But so that idea is, David Epstein wrote a great book called Range, and that's exactly what he talks about. He said, when you're young, you want to invest in yourself and you want to learn skills and you want to have these diverse experiences, even separate mini careers, because a lot of people, some people they're gifted and they know from an early age, I want to be a surgeon or I want to be a professional fighter or whatever it is. I knew what I wanted to do when I was young. It was in finance. Then I changed. I wanted to be a professional fighter. Then I loved the idea of real estate. So my ideal has changed several times in my life. And I think for a lot of people, the ones that don't know from a young age, you just don't know what you want to do. So the best advice is invest in yourself, do different things where you gain experience, you gain qualifications, you hopefully have a good time while you're at it too. And you learn about all these different things. And then eventually you'll find your niche. And you hear these beautiful stories about some people that don't find their true love until they're, 50s, 60s, sometimes even 70s. And I find those stories so, so inspiring, because I just think in life, there's something to the effect of, if you're not growing, you're not staying the same, you're actually dying. And I think we always have to be striving for more and growing. And I think having that mindset when you're young, is don't feel bad if you don't know what you want to do. Just keep doing the best you can do and try not to focus too much on the future. And eventually the pieces will fall in place. And I really think there's a lot of truth to that and wisdom.
Well, in retrospect, that is beautifully said. And I wish, everything you said so eloquently was just put into a SIM card and inserted in my mind at that point. But really, the sunk cost fallacy, you're really committed to past investments. That's how I was feeling. I went through all the school and still didn't feel like it was good enough. After all your work, after all your time, all of your money, people ask, why people similar in my situation. And I'm sure when you were in your situation, it's like, why would I keep going? Right. It's really easy to begin having those irrational discussions with ourselves and talk ourselves into staying in situations because of what we have put into. And we don't want to be a bigger failure or experience any more negative emotions. And what helped me at that time was to really reframe the sunk cost as something positive, similarly to what you just explained, and going back to what you said, it makes you better at what you decide to do, right? All of that time, all of that pain, even at that time when you're feeling like these experiences are just like gone to the chute. No, it really were accumulated experiences. If we digest them meaningfully, this makes us so much wiser. And I do think, as a therapist, I see a lot of clients where I can't say, I can completely relate, but I've seen things, I've lived through things, I've heard a lot of things to where I can parallel with them. And there's so much more empathy on my part and so much more, embracing of their pain and their sorrows, because I remember going through that. And yes, I am now in a place where what I do plays a large component of my self-worth, my sense of self. And kind of want to shift that a little bit to how sunk cost fallacy relates to relationships as well.
Well, all the statistics show that for single people today, dating is really tough. And I think a lot of it is due to abundance of options from online dating and people's mentalities in many different ways. But there's no, I mean, there's all these statistics showing how many young people want to be in fulfilled relationships and they just can't meet compatible people. And we can look at our friends, and I think you have a large group of single girlfriends. I have a large group of single guy friends. And I mean, without, of course, we have our bias because they're our friends, but I think objectively we can say, they're attractive, they're intelligent, they're educated, they're charming, they have good careers. Like they have so many good, positive, wonderful things. And a lot of them are struggling to meet that one. And I always think about how lucky we were to meet because there's always luck involved. And I always have the disclaimer when I put a picture of us on Instagram and I say my soulmate, I do consider you my soulmate in so many ways because I think we're so lucky that we see the world in so many different ways. We see the world in the same place. We also both came to America as immigrants, so we have that shared background. So there's a lot of things about our backgrounds and the way we look at today and the way we look forward is similar. So we're very compatible. And the relationship I had before you was literally the least compatible out of all the ex-girlfriends I had, where it was so bad that we had a fight one day and she somehow got hold of one of my childhood friends in England. She called him. Don't even know how she got his number, but he called me right after it. He said, buddy, who's this crazy girl you're dating? You need to end it immediately. He said, square peg, round hole. Basically, you are the most incompatible people in every major way. And I think that's something that a lot of successful people, whether it's CEOs in business or entrepreneurs or these people that are so successful in one aspect of their life, they get in these relationships where they're not compatible from day one, but because they're winners in life, they have that winning mentality where that mentality is, if it's difficult and you have problems, you keep trying and eventually you'll make it work. In life, that's great. But in relationships, if you're fundamentally different from the get-go, that's actually a terrible approach. And it takes a real skill. It takes a real skill, not just in relationships, but in life sometimes too, to realize like, hey, listen, I'm going to walk away and I'm going to take the loss on this one because there's a bigger picture here. So I think the idea of compatibility in relationships and just how dating is so hard today, I'd love to kind of get into that because I think that's so apropos for so many of our friends and so many people that might listen to this.
There's so much to dismantle of what you said that I think are perfect kind of segues to discuss those topics individually. Compatibility, why online dating, that's a huge component of why dating, I think, is terrible these days. But sunk cost fallacy, you shared about your ex-girlfriend, and that makes me think of me. I mean, you were probably with her for much shorter than I was with my ex, but I was with someone for 11 years. And the last few years, I was completely miserable. I was so unhappy, grew apart. I grew the relationship probably 4 years before, I should have probably ended 4 years before I actually did. But I stayed because I thought, well, that's the right thing to do. I grew up in a very conservative background where my mom was always saying, like, no, you have to stay loyal. Divorces aren't a thing, right? And I wasn't married to him, but it was just that seed in my mind. You have to be loyal. And funny comment in front of me just came to mind. It was when we were choosing a dog for our family, and you gave me the reins to choose our dog, and you said, I trust you. You'll find a dog that's compatible for us. And thought I found one, and I had told. I said, we're going to take him home. We were committed to taking him home. But as time went, I was kind of assessing his personality and had to really consider that, all the other members of the family. I said, oh gosh, I don't think he's the right fit. And our friend Melissa had said, you wouldn't marry a guy because you felt bad for him, right? That's all I needed to hear. And that's just so true, right? And yeah, so we do that quite a lot in relationships too, is what I'm saying. We end up staying with people because of the investments that we made. And
if I could just say real quick, you just reminded me, there's a great article that, again, Brad sent me a few years ago. And it said, if you're single and you're looking for the right person, you're actually in a really good place, because the worst place you can be is in a bad relationship. If you're single, you could literally any day meet the person that's going to be your soulmate or future wife or husband. And, it can be that day, it can be the following day, it can be next week. It's going to happen. Whereas if you're in a bad relationship, you have to first get out of the bad relationship, then heal, then you'll be open to meeting somebody. So being single is a lot better when you're looking for a relationship than being in a bad relationship. So the idea of cutting your losses is very powerful.
Right. Yeah. And we hope sometimes that people will change over time. I like to say this to my clients, people don't change people. So staying in a bad relationship or choosing someone you know is bad for you because you hope that this person will change, situation will change, usually doesn't change very rapidly. And then you miss those opportunities to possibly meet someone that's more compatible for you.
Why is online dating so problematic?
Mm. Dating has obviously changed. I mean, it was shocking to me again after hibernating for 11 years with someone, and then all of a sudden I'm single, and they're like, "Oh, well, online dating is here." And I'm like, "Yay!" But also, oh darn, this isn't. This isn't. Some parts weren't great. I think just because I've actually done a mini dissertation on dating and why the dating ecosystem is fragile. I've done a lot of research on this and I presented this at Northwestern. I'd like to go into it, but that was already stressful as it is. But I'd like to go into a few details. So in the past, before internet sensation, people actually had to talk in person. People actually had to come up to each other in a social setting and introduce themselves if they had motivations to want to pursue someone. That sounds so scary now, right? You see people at Starbucks just like staring at their phones, like you make eye contact in the elevator. Remember when we used to live in a condo? It's like, oh my God, don't even look at me. it's too overwhelming. So imagine how intimidating that is. I guess if you see someone attractive, is it even appropriate to come up to that person anymore? But with technology, it's changed a lot of the way people meet, people date, people use text more often, they DM, and of course that decreases the opportunity to have that important sustained time face to face to get to know a person. And gosh, dating world is within an ecosystem, so the ecosystem of dating is just very fragile. You have people who become very anxious and depressed who can't because they feel bad about themselves. Like they could be very confident people, but you throw them into this ecosystem and their mentality changes. So then they feel like they can't be themselves anymore. They don't even know who they're meeting. There's just a lot of fear. So the influences of social media, internet dating, attitudes that people have perpetuated and normalized, like, ghosting is normal. Feels like that's just, oh yeah, I just stopped talking to that person. I don't think a couple of decades ago that would have been appropriate. You probably would have felt bad about that, but that's a normalized thing. And I like to use the analogy for dating now as that it's like window shopping. You go online to browse products you think are attractive, but sometimes you don't have intentions to buy it. Or you get so overwhelmed with the number of options. And, well, you can call that the paradox of choice. And it actually messes with the reward systems in our brain. Like when I was on dating platforms, it's like, oh, wow. It's like you were getting rewarded with like the stimuli, like became addicting. And then you start thinking that it becomes like a shopping spree. You get some inundated choices.
Well, the Barry Schwartz wrote a book called The Paradox of Choice, and he wasn't talking about dating. He was just talking about life. And there's something to that in Western societies now. We have so many choices about everything that there's all the studies show you're either a sufficer, which means that you just kind of make a choice and you're happy with it, or you're a maximizer, where you really try and maximize every choice. And all the evidence shows that sufficers are so much happier. And that's one thing, like if I just look at the 3 places that I bought to live in Chicago, my first 2 condos and a house, all of them was very quick. I just made the choice. I knew what I wanted. So I guess in many ways, and same with you, I knew that I wanted to go all in when we started dating. And, you moved in very quickly and we got engaged fairly quickly too. And I think so in many ways, I'm lucky that I'm a sufficer, not a maximizer. And when it comes to online dating, the maximizers, you're dating a girl. I'll use a guy as an example. One of my friends, he's dating a girl. He's happy. She's got all these great qualities. Then they have one bicker. And instead of him, like in our parents' generation, you stick it out. But today, you have like a little silly fight about absolutely nothing and boom, you're swiping and there's 100 options at your fingertips. And I think that idea of just too many options and the ease of options means that all the connections are that much weaker because you don't put the effort in. And there's a study they just did. I was just reading about it the other day. Something like a third of young people today have never approached someone to like hit on the way I used to have to do when I was young. You'd have to hit on someone in person, right? At a bar or a club or a restaurant or out or whatever it is, the situation. And there's that fear of rejection. And people are so scared of rejection, the young people today, that something like a third of them have never approached someone in person and therefore they've never been rejected. But I think that's such a wrong way of living life. I'm just reading Arnold Schwarzenegger's latest book, and that's exactly what he's talking about. It's like the doers and the go-getters in life, rejection and failure are just part of living a flourishing life. Look at any great athlete. He's failed more times than the average person. That's exactly why he's great. And so I think that idea of just people today being fearful of rejection and therefore they're not even trying when it comes to relationships is a huge, huge problem.
But they try online because that's a big bail. That is a security factor. And I like to go back in that time where I was like, oh, wow, look at all these people that I can connect with. And I have to say, it was really sad because I started looking at people as objects at the store. And you get all these matches and you can swipe all day long. You know, it's like, okay, you like them enough, you can get coffee and maybe dinner if you really like them. But really, everyone started looking the same. The experience started feeling the same. And then you're just like, all right, then what? We just trick ourselves in believing that something better will come along. Someone will blow us out of the water, and we wait for those feelings to sweep us off our feet. So yeah, that attributes a little bit to being lazy, because it's like if it's so easily accessible, right? And it's a surplus of choices, but then it just mostly doesn't come. But another thing that I'm seeing about why but dating in general, has just been a bit sad, is that people are just not genuine with who they are. They're not even completely sure of what their intentions are. So again, with my window shopping analogy, if you don't even know what you wanted in the first place, you're most likely going to return it. There is a lack of direction with dating. If you don't even know who you are as a customer and you end up buying product you think you wanted versus what you actually needed, you're most likely going to return it. And then you just go back to the store and you just keep going and going and going. So we have this conundrum that people who say they want true love just seem to kind of waste their time. They go around like a hamster on a wheel all day long. They spend their time, they spend their energy and money to do opposite of what they say they actually want to do or find. And then they wonder, oh man, what's wrong with the dating world? Well, it's people's attitudes. It's the lack of direction. So one of the main themes that I want to talk about under this category of compatibility is that people don't ask the right questions. You talked about how people are just so fearful of being in this world of dating, let alone like having a sit down conversation, asking the right questions to someone and be able to show their true selves to people and have a healthy mentality on dating. And I feel like that's diminished a little bit, that healthy mentality of what they want and what dating should be about.
Well, in terms of, before we even talk about the right questions, why knowing who you are helps attract the person you want. I read this great quote and I wrote it down. It said, your relationships will rarely be healthier than your self-esteem. So first you have to work on yourself. So not only know yourself, but also you can't love someone else till you love yourself. So I think that idea of just investing in yourself, figuring yourself out first, and then you can be the best self in terms of relationship. But in terms of asking questions, I've seen so many people like dating shows or, that the kind of stuff we used to watch, which is very entertaining, where they'd say, never talk about controversial issues on a first date. So like stay clear of politics and religion because, you don't want to talk about that. You just want to kind of talk about lighthearted things. So what do you think? Because in terms of right now, the US is so divided politically between left and right. I think it'd be very hard for someone who hates Trump to go on a date with someone that loves Trump and have any sustainability. He's such a explosively divisive human. And the same with, so many things. You saw this recent conflict with Palestine and Israel, and you saw, a complete split between people that are pro-Israel or, we have friends in Israel, which are telling us the tragedy is happening. And then people that say, actually, if you look at the history of what they've done to the Palestinian area of Gaza, there's some justification there. And like anything, geopolitics is not my forte. And all these issues are some blend of gray, right? Nothing's ever black and white. But there's certain things where they're just so divisive. I think that could make or break, compatibility in a relationship. So what should you be asking when you first meet somebody? And then I think about us and I think about how there's so many things that I didn't know about you until after we were living together, sometimes after we were married. I didn't know when 2020 came and the world shut down, we were already married. We'd already decided we were going to try for the first kid and start a family. And I was so thankful that you and I saw the world in the right way, because I was furious at the lockdowns. I thought they were so ridiculous. And my history's proven me right. But I remember thinking, if you're elderly or you're sick or you're vulnerable, you should be the one staying away from everything. To shut down society makes no sense. It's going to have devastating consequences for generations to come. And all that stuff is coming out. We've seen the devastating consequences among the youth and among businesses and all this different stuff. And I remember that the frustration, even just that example, if I had been there fuming at what I would consider craziness by the politicians that ran Chicago when we were living in Chicago, and you'd been like, "Are you crazy, baby? We should be scared." But that's a huge thing. But we saw the world in the same way. When we finally took a road trip a few months when we weren't even sure if the borders would be closed, the Illinois state border is so uncertain. And finally, we're just like, we got to get out of town. We loaded up the car with the dogs and we drove to Tennessee. And then we got to Tennessee and the sun was out and we saw all these people just living a normal life. It was wild, the difference between state to state. But I remember on that drive, we went to Dunkin' Donuts. We both got huge iced coffees and we were just talking. And I was just expressing all the frustration of the last few months came out. And I was like, I don't know if America's the place for me in the future. Like I'm really upset by what's happening. And I've really adopted the American sense that I never used to have when I lived in England of freedom and freedom from despotic governments and mayors and people locking. I remember going for a run on the lakefront at midnight by myself and having the cops stop me for running because of COVID. Like I didn't see a soul out there. It was when I talked to the cops. It's not their fault. They were doing the job and they were apologizing. I'm like, I'm sorry. I know it's crazy, but we've closed the lakefront. And so the fact that I remember on that drive being so thankful when I said, baby, like, I don't know if I even want to live in this country anymore. Like I'm thinking about downsizing and just living a simple life and finding some lovely little town, some fishing village on the Spanish coast. And maybe we just go there for a few years and regroup because I'm kind of done with this. And I remember you were so open to it. The fact that, so I'm just giving you like 3 or 4 examples in our life where this was after we were married. I didn't know how you'd react in all these situations, but luckily we were compatible enough where we did see things in the same way. Mm-hmm. So I always wonder, like, how much should you be, like, I'll use one of my best friends, Louis, as an example. When he goes on these dates, sometimes he'll say to me, do you think I should even try with this girl? Because I find her attractive and she seems nice, but we have very fundamental different views on X, whatever that is. And that's something, I don't know the answer to that.
Well, that is a lot to unpack, but I think the short answer to that, as you mentioned, we're just compatible, and we did spend a lot of time figuring out, do we have the same fundamental pillars of values and all those little things you can figure out, right? But the big things was, are we both flexible? Are we both open to moving anywhere around the world? Those were things we did talk about. So, those are just like big things. Like, we are okay with being nomads. Yes, we love our families, but that was an important value to you both and I, that to be flexible. I went to a couple of grad school programs and I was like, I want to leave. I want to explore. And that was a big thing. And I know some couples that I see, they're not very, one's more flexible than the other. And that's when there's becomes more resistance. But I want to just get back on topic a bit when we talk about compatibility. What makes people compatible? I have these conversations with a lot of my girlfriends and they're like, well, what is it? And it's not because you're just attracted to each other. It's not that. That's almost like lust. It's deeper than that. There's a combination or the myriad of factors for that. You have to have that intimate connection. You have to have shared interest, a healthy emotional attachment. What's the passion? That's when we talk about the attraction and the mutual respect. But I feel like that all interplays with each other. You have the passion. Let's say you have the passion first, but then you find out, oh, wow, we have the same interest. Oh, wow, we have the same values. That develops mutual respect. That develops even more attraction. That develops even more passion. But if you go even deeper than that, you may not think about things like genetics. I'm not saying that you go on a date and you're like, oh, do you know what your genetics are? But just think about somebody with this certain gene called the DRD4 gene. It's this dopamine receptor that's known to regulate traits like being thrill seekers. And I read about this. I was like, wow, that's so wild. So those people must be must feel more compatible with someone that's more spontaneous or more adventurous. And I'm certain that you are one of those people because we ran a race for our honeymoon. And guess what? I didn't complain about it. I was like, that's pretty cool. And I've never ran a race. But again, because we knew that we're both flexible and we're open and we're up for adventure, I thought that was really cool, and on a deeper level, really on a deeper level, think about the influences of your culture, how that affects how you select your mate. Whether or not we realize it, we are surrounded by systems. We have systems in our families, our peers, even and think about the transitions in our lives where we've changed quite a lot. We've been impacted the most about that. So change happens with that. And that's why, they say, bravo to some of my best girlfriends who have been married for like over 20 years. That's just an anomaly, but and we'll talk a little bit about that later. But I think because they were lucky enough to find someone who was very compatible with them in the first place, they were able to develop more of that mutual respect and grow with each other, right? They were able to, even they had transitions in their lives, they were able to kind of navigate that together because they were so similar.
What you just said there, in a healthy marriage, long term, I think, we're coming up to our 5 years, so it's not like I have huge amounts of experience, but I've seen those friends, shout out to my buddy Christian, his wife, Hanny, they've been together, I think, over 20 years. And I've seen them both. I remember when I met him in 2006, so it's about 17 years ago, they're already together. And I've seen them both grow and develop in their own ways. And that's why they're still in love and going strong. And I think that's the secret to these long relationships is it doesn't matter if in a couple, one of you maybe is still trying to figure out their life. The other one in the couple could already have started their career. So they're at different places in their life. But as long as they're both working on each other individually, and then also working on themselves together as a container, as a family unit. And I think that's the key to these long relationships. And you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think if you looked at your girlfriends that have had these long relationships and, childhood sweethearts, and they're still together now in their late 30s, is because they've both grown a lot together. Because the problem is if one person is growing a little bit or maybe not growing much at all, and the other person is growing over time, you just become more and more different. And there's a big gulf between you. But I think if you both are developing and growing individually, then you're going to be okay. And I think that's one thing that you and I do well. And it's a tough balance is in a good long-term relationship, you have to do three things. You have to focus on you. Your partner has to focus on them. And then together, you have to also focus on yourself together, the relationship. Mm. And it's those three things that make a flourishing relationship. And it's hard. It's really hard to do all three. And that's one thing I remember having to learn early on in the relationship is I've got that traditional thing where I'm the man, I'm the breadwinner. I was very wealthy in my 20s and I was rebuilding in real estate and I was doing okay. And you were back in graduate school, so you weren't bringing home a paycheck at the time. And I remember thinking, Jen doesn't even have to work. I'll take care of that. And then I had the realization that actually Jen is a smart girl and she wants to have the personal fulfillment and she's really good at what she does. So it's not about she doesn't have to because I can provide for a certain lifestyle. It's about you having the creative expression of exercising those signature strengths that you have because you are a natural therapist. And I remember hearing you on the phone with your girlfriends and you would literally give them an hour therapy session just in a phone call, whether you realize it or not. And I'm like, you might not get paid for being a therapist. You might not have the diploma on the wall, but you are a therapist. And so that's why you enjoy it so much. So sorry, that was a long rant, but the idea of this growing individually and also growing as a pair, I think is the key for a successful long-term relationship.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I'd like to talk a little bit more about that later on. But yeah, it's kind of going back to our friends that have been together over 20 plus years, right? And it was beautifully said, just like all the life journey that they could have chosen to stay together or apart, but because of that, the fundamental values are very similar. And I like to assess my friends who have been together. They're kind of like my mini case studies sometimes. But really look at their pillars of fundamental values that they are like strong family people. I can only imagine if they met back then when they were 20 and one said, I actually don't want kids. And the other said, I really want a family. I'd be interested to see how that would have played out, right? Because that's a really big kind of value to want a family or to not want a family. And I want to segue a little bit to arranged marriages. That's just a good example of why that lasts. And I am more than so when you're not in an arranged marriages and why certain cultures who practice that are flourishing and have less divorce rates than our culture. But we've talked a little bit about that, and I think it's really fascinating. It obviously doesn't sound like the most romantic method to meet someone. We love being humans with free will and autonomy, but there's something to be said about countries like India where arranged marriages is a cultural norm. I tested you this other day, so there's like no surprise, but I can answer this again.
It's absolutely fascinating, yeah. Because we used to watch that show, Indian Matchmaker, and I remember reading. I didn't know the statistics. I remember reading something about a psychologist, and he was saying the reason that arranged marriages work so much better than marriages via love is because a lot of marriages that start with that lust, like you said, that the first 6 months, the honeymoon period, the physical connection, everything's great. It's because it's very physical and it doesn't last. And then as soon as you get to the more deeper things, once you're a year in the relationship and it's not the honeymoon period anymore, then when the deeper things come out, if you're not compatible, and it's kind of, if you don't ask the right questions at the beginning, it's a bit of a crapshoot, right? Are you going to be compatible? Then when those big issues come out, that's when the marriages don't last. And I think, what is it? About 50% of marriages in the West or the US don't end up in divorce.
Right. And I asked you the other day, I said, what do you think the divorce rate is in India?
And I think, what did I say? Like 20%. Yeah, I was like, it's probably like 2.5 times worse in the US with marrying for love than it would be for arranged marriages. And you told me it's something crazy low, isn't it? Like 1%.
1%. And I had to re-look it up because I remember reading about this and I'm like, whoa, it's 1%. You know, that's just quite a discrepancy. 1% versus 50%. And they say second marriages in America usually end up having a 60 to 70% divorce rate. And I think one of the secrets of why arranged marriages work so well is people are set up mostly based on their fundamental values and similar fundamental values. All of the systems that I've discussed. And we did have kind of a hoot and a laugh when we were watching that show because they brought in astrology and the stars and the moon. And, you know, that's totally my thing. And I'm like, ooh, this is interesting. But really all the systems that I've talked about, the systems within us, the systems that have shaped our core beliefs, our core values, you know, our paradigm, our truths. These matchmakers are understanding that and they're basing off who's compatible based on that. So in America, I feel like we like to look at love as this magical life altering phenomenon. Like this person can complete me. This person's going to make my life better. And I don't think that's necessarily the right way to look at it. It fizzles out. I think it clouds your judgment when we talk about that lust and this person's going to sweep us off our feet. You know, that fantasy is going to be eroded very quickly when real life happens.
Well, back to the questions. So what do you think you should be asking things like one of our single friends, if they have pretty strong political views, left or right, should they even go on a date with someone with strong political views the other way? Because I think they're kind of wasting their time. You know, I think that for me is just such a divisive thing. You're kind of starting off already at a disadvantage. But the idea of, is family important to you? Are you looking for a family? I think that's the most important thing, because that was the biggest issue before we met with a lot of my ex-girlfriends, is they wouldn't bring that up for a while. And then this was back when I was fighting. And my focus was fighting, and I didn't know what I wanted to do after. And I definitely didn't want a family at the time. And none of them were a good match for, marriage anyway. But it would always come up, and that was normally the end of the relationship. And my longest relationship before you, and she gave me an ultimatum, said either you marry me or I've got to move on. And I said, well, I'm not really looking for that. And then we broke up. And I felt bad because I've never lied to any of these ex-girlfriends about my intentions, but I wish they had come up earlier, because as a man, you feel bad about when a woman guilt trips you and says, these are my prime dating years that you've wasted, and all the guilt trip crap that I dealt with before by these ex-girlfriends. And so that's obviously an important question, right? Are you looking for a family? Where are you at in that? But what else do you think are some of the key things early on in dating that you should be asking?
Well, I want to bring us kind of into room and talk about, how we navigated things, what made you and I work out so well. And it was having those deep, deep, significant conversations about that. And people do change. People do change. And I'll get into that a little bit later about how we kind of mold our truths and our belief system around those systems that we talked about. And sometimes the systems that motivated us or influenced us to think the way that we do, we find out later on, like, that's actually not what I want to think. And sometimes you do. And you've done this for me too, where because we have such great mutual respect, there were some things that I believed in that I'm like, wow, it does make sense, right? So I don't say that you should just, oh, I can't go on a date with this person because of that. You have to do a lot of analysis. You can't just be like, oh, yeah, we don't have the same political beliefs. Like, that's it. Do a lot of digging, ask a lot of questions. So when we first met, again, we talk a lot about our future, our goals, and our wants. And I know I put you through the ringer. You were not exactly happy with my bluntness. I was very dense and substantial with my get to the point questions. But I will thank you because the way that you responded even validated that we had similar values, right? You were so eloquent and you took the time to really give me answers. And from my perspective, there was discrepancies between us. So if I would have just based this off, well, I was in a relationship for 11 years. Like, I had a really long relationship and your longest one was like 3 or 4, right? I could have just said, I'm going to ask you because now I'm scared that you're not a long-term guy, right? And just for shits and giggles, I think this is really funny because there was so much fear when I did start analyzing you. This handsome British man in shape, professional in his late 30s. And that's why I thought, why are you still single? A lot of people, I thought, why are you still single? You reminded me of the meme of men that didn't exist. And I met some guys that resembled your profile who seemed to just want to have a good time and not be bounded by one woman. So I need a clarification. So I kind of challenged in a way where I asked a lot of questions to kind of assess, look at you holistically and not just say, oh, he's only been with a girl, oh, he's had to string a relationship. That's it. Similarly, like, oh, political values, we don't match on that. That's it. I really, really took the time to hear your answers. And so did you with me, right? And I was able to understand your functions of behaviors and why you did the things that you did. And I remember my best friend Jenny said in her speech at our wedding that she was really worried about me falling so hard for this handsome British guy, because you just had this profile that was too good to be true. And of course, she adores you, similar to everyone else in my life. But yeah, and it's not always perfect. Let me just put that as a disclaimer because I'm going into my tangent about this fairy tale. But yeah, but on topic, people are so scared and people will kind of deviate the other way. So they're asking these right questions, but then all of a sudden, like, their questions are answered to what they don't want to hear. Don't let that deter you. Keep asking more questions and try to build a holistic profile about somebody and then make that decision.
Yeah, I remember I was at the gym. I was just doing some weight training and you sent me that text in between one of my sets about like, well, can you tell me why you're in your late 30s and you're still single? And I remember thinking, like this is something that I would love to answer over dinner, but I know you were very big on, you were trying to find out if your time is very precious and you had all these different guys that were hitting on you and you weren't even going to go on a dinner date unless you saw some kind of compatibility. And so I took the time and it was a long break between my 2 sets because I took the time to actually explain why. And it was a function of 2 things. One, I was very focused on my goals at the time. And, we just watched the fantastic, I'd recommend it to everyone, David Beckham documentary on Netflix, the 4-part series. And you saw what he put his wife through with his career, changing countries, changing clubs. Like, it was just so hard for her with 2 kids and in and out of schools, changing countries. It was just brutal on her. And that's exactly why when I was fighting, I didn't want to have anything serious because I was very focused on that. And I knew it was such a selfish endeavor. And even, my ex-girlfriends that didn't care about me too much, putting them through, one of them through one of my brutal losses where I got a really big cut and it was a bloody fight. I remember one of my friends saying, man, I was sitting next to your girlfriend at the time. And I was just thinking, Jesus, like, this has got to be hard for her to see. So, that wasn't the most significant relationship at the time. To put someone like you through that when I was married with a kid or something, I just didn't want to do that. So that was genuinely the truth. But the other part is when you talk about maximizers and sufficers, I was a sufficer in many things. I was a sufficer to settle down when I knew but I just didn't have those feelings for those ex-girlfriends. Like I knew they weren't the one, and I wanted to wait until I found someone that I really wanted to build a future with. And so I think that I could see you on paper thinking, oh yeah, he's probably a playboy. He's having a good time. He's not ready to commit. But it was just, I was just waiting for the right one. And I've got a few friends that I know now, they're in their late 30s or early 40s. And I know some girls probably look at them the same way. And I know they're also exactly like me. They were working on their career when they were young. And now they're not going to settle. They want a family, but they also want to meet the right person to have a family with because they care about the sanctity of marriage. So I think, yeah, it's good to be a little bit skeptical in dating, but don't look at everyone too skeptically because a lot of the time they just haven't met the right person. And if you go into that with that mindset of like, oh yeah, well, he hasn't committed and he's this all blah, 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 it's not a good thing.
Oh, yeah, there definitely has to be a balance. And I know this happens for a lot of people. You get so excited about meeting someone, you're like, oh, they catch my eye. And then it gets really scary because we're all so scared, right? We're scared, we're jaded. We're scared once we feel that type of closeness. So my advice is really get to know each other, develop that comfort zone, that safe space, that build that rapport. And I know we had wonderful circumstances that allowed us to talk for quite a while, to develop all that and really learn about each other. And if someone is truly compatible to you with your values, yes, it's going to get scary because you're feeling close, but those similarities, that closeness, that rapport that you build will carry you far.
We were so lucky that when we started talking, first you were traveling for 2 weeks in the Philippines, and the day you got back, I was going to Europe for 2 weeks. And so we got to talk for a month before we even had a date and met each other in person. And there was so much pressure the way I was looking at it because I'd invested a month of emotions in somebody building something emotionally when, of course, on the photos, you look very attractive, but you never know until you meet someone in person. And I was like, man, if we just don't have any chemistry or we don't click or she's awkward in person or whatever it is, we just, I was so worried because I built it up in my mind. And that looking back, that was such a good thing because I can honestly say that I loved you as a person before our first date. And I mean, so I was so lucky that we already had an emotional connection before we even went out on our first date to dinner. I mean, and no way would that have happened if we weren't both traveling. We'd have probably gone on a date in a few days or in a week, and we wouldn't have had that same emotional connection before we started seeing each other. So that was just a lucky circumstance that we were in.
I agree. I think about that sometimes. What if we just went all in and maybe we could have had I'm sure we would have had the same results, but I think we built such a solid foundation and such a solid amount of respect for each other that there was lots of resistance in the beginning because we already kind of knew so much about each other. And again, that respect. And when you first meet someone, and you're just attracted to that person. And I could safely say we both look at each other like, oh, we're attracted to each other. And then, we matched in so many other ways just from our small chat and things like that. But that's how people kind of meet, right? Like they swipe on each other or they meet someone, oh, that person's so attractive. And, oh, okay. Like they meet like really, really limited criteria of what their values are, but like, oh, this person's sweeping me off my feet. That is when people tend to ignore the mutable factors to the other person's traits. And it's eventually show up those values that are very inconsistent with yours, show up inevitably. It is going to be more difficult. You either have to, I'll give you an example. Just imagine you build this house, which is like the relationship. You build this house without a solid foundation. You're going to use the incompatible materials. The house is eventually going to collapse. Not to say that you can't repair it, but it would have been less of a headache, would have been less costly if you would have went with the strong structural materials. Similarly, in finding a partner, who has those compatible values. And again, when you meet people these days, we just get carried away by the shallow ideals that creates the lust that we were talking about. And we mistake that excitement, those emotions for compatibility. Our judgments are clouded. We just want to feel like, oh, on cloud nine. We want to be with that person who makes our heart race. We want to feel excited. But emotions come and go. Why is it that you feel lost and in love one night and then maybe the next morning you're like, ooh, I got to get out of here, right? Because feelings are fleeting. But when you meet somebody where you're like, wow, we're really compatible in so many ways, mutual respect is built. Instead, that rapport is built. And you don't have to break down the entire house and implement new materials. You just slowly make repairs here and there.
just reminded me of something I heard a long time ago. And it said the best indication of if a marriage will work is if both of them want the marriage to work. And I remember when I first heard that or read it, whatever it was, I remember thinking, well, what a stupid thing. That doesn't actually mean anything. But actually, it's incredibly profound because what it's saying is both of you want the marriage to work. Both of you have the commitment to making it work. And I think that it's such an important thing. You have to both, whether it's marriage, whether it's a family, whether it's just a casual fling, you have to both be on the same page and you have to both want it. So many issues with relationships because people are on different pages and that just causes, a lifetime of conflict.
That's why you have to ask the right questions. But going back to the point you made earlier is you need to know who you are. That is the first thing you need to do before you ask those questions is know who the hell you are. And I'll say after ending my 11-year relationship, I spent so much time. I mean, diaries upon diaries of reflecting who I even was. And of course it's like 11 years and this happens to me, I'm in my 30s. And I'll tell you, after that, I really questioned, who I was. And who I was in that relationship versus who I was, I'm today, who I wanted to become. And I realized that I really wanted to please that partner. So instead of pleasing myself and being genuine to myself, I tried to fit myself. I molded my values, my everything to fit into that person's world, which obviously didn't work out because sooner or later you're going to be very resentful and you're not, and you realize this is not going to work, right? So I really took the time to ask, Jen, what are your worldviews? What are your foundational values? You had your mom kind of chirping in your ear that no divorce, no, and I still believe, I think that people divorce too easily. So I have that value of like, yeah, you don't give up, but also know when to give up, right? But I let a lot of shit go because I had that in my mind of you don't give up, you don't ever get a divorce. So I stayed in a really crappy relationship. So then, when I did my self-reflection, I said, listen, and that's why I asked you so many questions. I'm not just trying to meet random guys that meet the criteria of attractive, smart, and cute. That's like a dime a dozen. I asked, what are my non-negotiables? I didn't want to meet someone with just really hollow criteria that would provide me that short lasting spark. I wanted a long lasting relationship. So I was going to invest in myself first. So I knew how to attract a person that would be on my level or my same frequency. So my advice is you have to know who you are. Question why you want the things you even want and the things you actually don't want. Because again, those systems that influence you, like I mentioned a little bit earlier, they shaped you and wait, is that really who I am? Just because my parents or who I think I should be, I have to abide to that. Because if you stick to that, that's not your genuine self. You're going to be attracting partners who are representing traits and characteristics of the old you, the older version of yourself, or values you think that you have or that were imposed on you. So I think that's very important. Like, do some check-ins with yourself. Do I really believe in that? Is that really who I am? And then you'll be able to meet someone on your level once you kind of establish that. So
One thing I want to say by the intellectual Gad Saad, he wrote a book called The Sad Truth About Happiness. And he said the biggest two decisions you make in life that are going to impact your life happiness is who you marry and the work you do. And I think that it's such a good thing to emphasize. We kind of touched on it, but I have too many friends that will spend years and years and years building a business or building a career. But then they'll go on a couple of dates and they'll be like, maybe she'll do. And they just, you've got to put the work in. And that comes back to the fact that I got married late because I didn't find you until I was older. And I didn't settle down with one of these other people that I didn't feel that connection that I want to spend the rest of my life with this person. So invest, like if you're dating, don't get frustrated. It might take you another 15, 20 days. It might take you another 80, 90, 100 days. Put the time in because what else is worth investing the time than trying to meet someone you're compatible with that you want to raise, if you want a family, that you want to raise a family with. And that's something that I have seen among my friends where they'll put so much time in different business ventures, but they'll get frustrated because they have 7 bad dates. And it's like, bro, it's a numbers game. Life in many ways is a numbers game. You have to put the time in. And so I just want to stress that I want to write a book one day for our son, and it's going to be the top 10 things that I've learned in my life, a lot of them through failures. And when it comes to relationships, whether it's romantic relationships or business relationships, I've had some incredibly good ones and incredibly bad ones. And you're the example of the best relationship I've ever had. But in terms of business, I've had some good business relationships, and I've also had a god awful one that you know who that is, and it's cost me an outrageous amount of money and stress. And so this idea of relationships is so important because you can go so much further with someone than alone. But you've got to choose wisely and don't just jump into the wrong relationship.
I really want to emphasize on that. I could not agree with you more, because shortly before I met you, I lost faith in ever becoming a mother. And you know now just how much we both adore our family life. I love being a mother to our son. I mean, that is like such a big part of me, being a mother. But again, going back to molding yourself into someone else's belief system so you can, stay in that system, or to stay in that relationship, to stay consistent there. I started seeing how incapable my partner could have been as a father. So I was like, okay, maybe I'm just not meant to be a mother. And my friends thought I was absolutely crazy. And I reflected on it and thought, well, I did already have names picked up for my children back when I was a teenager. And I did spend a good decade of my life working with children. So if I didn't like kids, why would I be doing that? And the fact was, I always wanted a family. So molding your belief systems around current circumstances, check that. I could not be any more grateful that I met someone who is compatible with me in that way, that brings out that side of me of being a mother. And there's something funny about that is because here we both are now, right? Just again, utterly in love with her family. And my best friend Nikki mentioned that she saw my ex-boyfriend out when she was with her family, and he kind of scoffed as I'm like, oh, must be tough having all these kids. And basically updated her on his life and said, yeah, I'm like living alone, no kids with my girlfriend, and I'm perfectly happy. So imagine that if I would have stayed in that relationship, like I may not have had children, or we would have ended up having children, and I would have been with someone who did not have the same values as I do with wanting to grow a beautiful family and having a legacy and generativity with our children. And I could not be more grateful I was out of that situation. And
I'll give you an example. I'll kind of give you the other side of that. When you're in a good relationship, be open to change, because I was never one way or the other. Like, I really want kids. I don't want kids. I had a great upbringing and I love my dad. He was a great dad, and my mom did her best. And I think I had great parents and great childhood memories. But before we met, I remember thinking, well, I'm in my mid-30s now and I haven't met anyone, so maybe kids are not in the cards for me. And my uncle and aunt, who I'm very close to, shout out to Uncle Michael and Aunt Hillary, she's a hemophiliac, so she couldn't have kids. And they have this incredible marriage. They travel around the world. They just seem to really enjoy themselves. So I don't think you need kids to be happy. And I was like, well, maybe I won't have kids. I couldn't even conceive of the happiness that our cub gives me because I didn't know. And I think that's just one example. There's so many other examples I can give of things that I've changed my mind on the last 6 years we've been together. So also be a little bit flexible, like definitely know what you want today, but also be flexible of knowing the fact that you don't know what you don't know, and you're going to change your views on so many things. And the reason I mentioned the whole politics thing in dating when we're talking about, one of my best friends, is because for me, it's not about if someone's, left or right. It's if someone's so dogmatic that they want to put all over their profile, I'm a Democrat or I'm a Republican. It's like, it's a way of thinking. For me, that's such a turnoff if I was single, not because I'm either Democrat or Republican. It's because on some things I lean left, and on other things I lean right, and on most things I lean libertarian. So if someone is so dogmatic about their views, I don't think they see the world in the same way as me. It's not that I maybe disagree with them, they are politically. It's that the first thing they want to shout on their profile. They want to say, like, this is me. It's like identifying to a political party. It's like, dude, get a life. Like, for me, that's kind of pathetic. Like, both parties are so corrupt, but yet you want to tie your wagon to one so dogmatically. And I think almost every major issue that we fight about as a country and as humanity in different countries too is a shade of gray. Like, every complex issue is complex for a reason, and you have to be open to changing your mind. And I'll give another example. I definitely am more Republican in the mindset of business. I believe in opportunity and hard work, and because I came from a different country and it took me 21 years to get my citizenship, and I worked really hard, and I got scholarships in college. And I always attributed any success I had to my hard work. And I've definitely changed my mind on that too, because I recognized that, yes, I worked very hard, but also I did have a lot of opportunities. And one of them was a loving father. And if you look at the statistics, if you don't have a father and you grow up in a fatherless household, you're something like 25 times more likely to end up in jail. 25 times. It's insane. I thought it would be like 3 or 4 times. So just the fact that I had that, I've changed my mind on opportunities. I'm much more open now to a lot of the views on, yes, America is incredible and capitalism is great, but yes, it's not perfect. And we have these huge segments of society where kids grow up and the pull towards crime is so strong because they don't have any father figure in the house, and all the neighbors are just, in those activities, and they don't have much choice. And so I'm kind of rambling, but be open to changing your mindset in relationships. Don't go into dating where you're like, I'm 26 and I figured out life. I'm this, I'm that. But it's like, dude, come on, like be a little bit open. That kind of comes down to know yourself,
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, that's a fine balance I'm preaching here. Know yourself, or ask the right questions. But I'm not saying, be inflexible. Right. Again,
Yeah.
find out people's functions and behaviors. I hear a lot when I am with clients and they're doing certain things, or they feel strongly about something, about politics or whatever. And I'm always like, what does that mean to you?
Mm-hmm.
What does that mean to you? What's the function behind that? And then you learn a little bit more about that person. Right? And then you kind of just pick that apart. So just to interrupt, I know our son is going to wake up very soon.
That's what I was going to say. I was like, any minute we're going to hear,
now there's going to be a debut of our little wonder child. And
but let me ask you real quickly, what's the significance of 111? Because you said, hey, I want to be episode 111. What is the significance of that?
Oh, the significance of 111. Oh my goodness. Well, I feel, and I can't even quote it correctly, but it's what your Jerry Seinfeld quote. What does Jerry Seinfeld say about that? About love stories?
What do you mean? I'm not sure which quote.
I think you always say, like, you should always have a great love story. Always have such a great love story.
Oh, yeah. Every good relationship starts with a great kind of, the story has to, the first date or the first meet has to be a good story for it to be successful.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And again, with our circumstances of us not being able to meet for almost a month, the first week in, because we were just so like blown away that we were so compatible in so many ways. You sent me a picture of a magnet you found in Europe that says every love story is beautiful, but ours is my favorite. So this is I just want to preface that I think during really hard times, and you're always going to have hard times in your relationships, remember your love story. Remember your love story. And that's what I definitely do when we talk a lot about 111. But to kind of give you the serendipitous factor of why 111 is so important. I mentioned that my mom passed away in 2016. She died on March 11th. I shortly left my 11-year relationship 2 weeks after she passed away because of these revelations that I had. And I just saw 111 over and over and over again. And I thought, okay, this must be, and I'm pretty scientific, I think my brain is just tricking me into it, but I just constantly saw that. Fast forward a year later, I'm at this cemetery and her first year death anniversary in the Philippines, and your face pops up, right? And it's on the 11th. And you messaged me. I actually opened the message. I'm at the cemetery and I'm like, whoa, mom really came through, because every time I saw 111, 1111 at the time, I would take a screenshot of it, or I would take a pause and say, Mom, I would talk to her. That's just kind of the way that I would talk to her. And I would say, I think I'm ready to meet someone. So on the 11th, when that happened, I was like, wow, this is so cool. And the more that we talked, the more that we learned that we had all these little serendipitous things that kind of, I felt like, brought us together. So one really cool example is one of my friends, Ashley. I met her one night when I was actually on a date. And she pulled me aside and said, yeah, okay, this guy seems great, but you didn't meet this one guy I met earlier. And you really should meet him. She likes books, he's intellectual, doesn't miss anything. She said, I also told him about you. And obviously we blew it off. we met on our own. But months later, she's asking me how dating is going. And I said, I really met this great guy. He's British. And she said, British? Wait a minute. She said, is his name Lawrence? And I said, yeah. She's like, that's the guy that I was trying to introduce you to. I mean, that just blew my mind. So, of course, you talked a little bit about our story, how it just felt right. You flew in the night that you flew in, you took me on a date. Our first date, we basically were like, that's it. Within that week, I moved in. You proposed 8 months later. It just was very, very quick. And I remember, I would just see 1111. And it's like, thank you, Mom. This is great. So I remember you said, well, where I'd really like to get married is in Tahiti. And Tahiti, that sounds familiar. And I'm like, oh, I think those are the screenshots that I used to take of the overwater bungalows where it would say 1111. And I'm like, yeah, that's great. So again, compatibility, right? There isn't a lot of resistance. I was like, I'm all for it. Let's do it. So I called the hotel in Tahiti and I said, we want to get married on a Saturday. And that was the 9th, I believe. And she said, sorry, we're booked out, but we do have 11/11 available. And we got married in 2018 and I told a friend of mine who's very into numerology and she said, we'll just add 20 and 18 together and everything was 111111. And it follows me. It followed me even when I gave birth to a son. That's a whole different topic. But, you weren't present with me because I had COVID and I had to be like in a COVID ward, basically delivered without you. But guess what? I was in room 11 on 11th floor. That is completely wild. So that has been part of our love story. And it's very sentimental. And that does keep the faith strong, I think, when times are rough. And I think about our love story and the serendipitous part of it. And it just keeps us going. So it's something beautiful, a beautiful component, I think, that makes sharing that even more special and being able to share that on this episode on 111.
I love that. And even just the idea of a lot of time I'll text you when it's 11:11 in the morning or 11:11 at night. And even just having a time to pause and be grateful or say, I love you. That's what life's about. Life, the older I get, the more I realize that the big things in life are great. But what makes a rich life is appreciating those small things. And it's just a way of us pausing and reflecting and acknowledging. And I think that's really beautiful.
It's just like a shared interest of ours, right? Like everyone should have, or shared meaning, I'm sorry. I think, no, not everyone needs to have like a numerology component to their love story, but definitely something about their story or there's something where they can connect, and pause, like you said, and be able to shift and feel like they have this togetherness.
I love that. Well, listen, anyone that's listened to this and enjoyed this, but Jen didn't cover something you want, we'll do a part 2. Please send me a message about anything you want us to talk about, because I'm sure we probably missed a few things. And Jen, it's been a real pleasure. And I think we need to go and find out or sick Cub and see how he's doing.
Yes, I'll see you soon. It was lovely to be on your show. And I think the fears have dissipated. So I think I could be up for podcast number 2. Thanks for having me.